thank you very much, everybody, for returning from lunch so punctually. We certainly started with a high energy session this morning, and we're going to continue that cracking pace this afternoon. This panel is focused on the relationship between energy and our oceans. The oceans are really more than just an obstacle to be crossed. Given our interconnected global economy, oceans are indeed the route through much of the energy that we need to power our region will flow. Recent advances in technology have also allowed us to develop energy resources both in and from our oceans. And in every step of this process, innovation has been and will be key. We've got an excellent panel of experts, scholars and practitioners who this afternoon are going to help us better understand energy in the maritime realm and the mandate for countries in the zone to work together to address these opportunities and challenges. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me absolute pleasure to introduce and welcome Naveen Uni, who is the Managing Partner in McKinsey & Company's Perth office. He's also a leader in the electric power and organisation practices in Australia. And alongside Naveen, welcome to Hiro Goda, who is Deputy Managing Director and Perth Branch Manager for Mitsubishi Australia Limited. And Hiro has over 25 years' experience in the oil and gas industry. And alongside Hiro, welcome to Dr. Michael Ottaviano, CEO and Managing Director of Carnegie Clean Energy. This company is renowned for the development of wave power technology, and Michael has more recently steered the company into the solar battery microgrid market. And it gives me a real pleasure to welcome Professor Zhong Feiteng, who is a professor at the National Institute of International Strategy, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing. And Professor Zhong's recent works have focused on China's energy security, South China Sea, and the One Belt, One Road initiative. Please join with me in welcoming our panel. So let me turn first to you, Naveen. And just given your role at a firm renowned for promoting innovation and efficiency, can you see any opportunities for energy and innovation in the maritime space?
Thanks, Deidre. There's a document here, and I don't know if you can see behind our heads, but I will talk to some of that now. But when I thought about this question the first time, the first thing I had to admit was I didn't know a lot about the maritime industry. And then I went back to my clients who are in power, in retail, and the one thing that they all know is disruption, and they are being disrupted at the speed of knots. And the question that I asked inside my organization was, how is the maritime industry dealing with that disruption as things happen? And so what I'd like to give is a few perspectives on how disruption could potentially affect the maritime industry and the role that we could play being in the zone within this blue economy as Minister Bishop described. There's no surprises here. New technologies are appending some very fundamental truths of business. Even businesses that you'd expect haven't had a lot of opportunity for disruption. But what's interesting is a lot of these technologies are coming together to impact industries in very fundamental ways. If you look at most industries such as automotive, there's a lot of structural waste that still remains. And what we mean by waste is things that make the industry less productive than it could be. If you take automotive, which is in the transportation logistics industry more broadly, a typical car spends about 95 or 96% of its time parked. Most of the fuel that you actually burn, which is a question on energy, actually never reaches the wheels. And if you actually look at safety, most deaths per year are caused by human error. And so you put all of this together, and then you take it to the commercial realm of commercial logistics, you find a lot of these things as well. So 30% of actual use of assets, the available load capacity is only filled up 50%. And you actually look at how much of the fuel is used to move goods, it's 5 to 10%. And you put all of this together and you say, okay, so what does it mean to be disrupted? What it means to be disrupted is 4 somewhat independent trends coming together. So you think about the connected car, you think about electrification, autonomy, and being shared. Now, each of these in of itself could disrupt an industry, but you put them together, and here's what you see happening. The cost of moving a car goes down from 54 cents, roughly. You take an average car running an average number of kilometers in a year, to about 8 cents. That's bringing it down to a seventh of its cost. What does this mean for transport as we know it? Now, what does this mean in the context of maritime industry? And the maritime industry is, you'd argue, one step behind, or maybe a few steps behind in terms of innovation and disruption. You see several of the same types of issues and questions coming up. We've just taken one example, and a very relevant and topical example for Western Australia. You take an LNG cargo, about 1 to 6% of the LNG is lost during delivery. About 3% is boiled off, and you'll see very similar statistics as you'll see in a car. You see a large part of the LNG is actually burnt off and not used for anything useful. And now you'd argue, is that the best way of thinking about LNG cargoes and how to optimize them? But you also look at the plant berth capacity, you think of the average tank capacity and the amount of crew that's not working at any given point. And so all of this leads to a broader question of how will the maritime industry be disrupted? And energy is one part of that. And the big question for us, being in the zone and being such big parts of the blue economy, in fact, I was going through my client roster in WA, and I realized that not one of my clients would actually survive without this blue economy. And I just realized how important this theme is for me. So thanks, Gordon. Thanks, Perth USAsia Center, for setting this up so I can actually understand how important this is. But this was the biggest question that I came away with, which is what is our role in shaping this disruption? The good news is there's a lot happening already in this space, and whether it's e-business platforms, whether it's modular services, advanced analytics, the industry is being reshaped as we speak. A lot of the new venture capital funding is going towards cars, and it's going towards Uber and Lyft and all of that. But the reality is, if we had an outsized role to play in any industry, this is possibly the one we should be thinking about.
So thank you, Naveen. A lot of opportunity outlined there. And I think one of the things that we can be really proud of in Western Australia is the innovation that we're seeing in this blue economy, and particularly in energy that's coming through in Western Australia. So Hero, turning to you, we recently saw the formation of the LNG Marine Fuel Institute. And I understand that you are serving on the board of the Institute. Can you perhaps set out for us some of the prospects for and implications of changing the type of fuel use in marine shipping? And this was something that Chris Salisbury referred to in his presentation this morning. So very excited to hear more about it from you.
Sure. Thank you, Deidre. Let me just start off by saying that gas is good, gas is clean, gas is inexpensive, and is in abundance. And gas is accessible. Because for some, unfortunately it is though, to see some of the eastern states are struggling, facing the gas shortage. I think Mitsubishi should be able to offer a solution or two. But it's a separate topic though, in other zone. So in this zone, I'm gonna focus on LNG marine fuel. Australia is on the verge of becoming the single largest exporter of LNG in the whole world. It is a blessing that there's so much gas here in Australia, in WA in particular. With increasing awareness of better climate, demand for gas is expected to grow dramatically, especially so in this zone. But use of gas in maritime transportation, however, has been limited. The reason being the readily availability of conventional fuel at competitive pricing and over-the-horizon nature of the industry to date. Things are changing though. International Maritime Organization has ruled last year that the emission control on sulfur content is to be capped at 0.5% by 2020. It is from 3.5% today. So the maritime industry used to be the over the horizon. is now tasked with the challenge of controlling the emission at sea, while they are at sea. Among all options available, we believe gas offers the best solution. LNG Marine Fuel Institute, or LMFI, is a newly established independent, not-for-profit entity which promotes the use of gas as transportation fuel in maritime space. There's a great opportunity here in AA to be a major contributor in transforming our sea lane into the green corridor. The question, though, is how do we go about doing that? The clock is ticking. 2020 is just around the corner, and the competition is mounting. Competition, speaking of competition, to state the obvious, Singapore is coming on very strong on this LNG bunkering business. They are no doubt the single largest bunkering port in the whole world, not only the region, but all in the whole world. And they are looking at it very keenly. Malaysia is also looking at it, and commercial ports along the coast of China are also looking at it. Korea is also looking at it. They have just launched a pilot project. It's both by the government and the industry. Japan is also looking at it. Toyota has, about a month ago, made an announcement that they will switch fuel for the automobile carriers, calling on the port of Chita, which is home to Toyota, the company. It's in Western Japan. So, how do you go about doing that? Creating a new industry is always a challenge because demand will not grow unless supply is warranted. Supply will not build or invest in enough infrastructure unless there's a clear demand for that particular goods. I'm thinking back how an LNG industry started in Pilbara about 3 decades ago. The new industry was underpinned by the very fact that there was a credible off-taker on a long-term basis for the product. So we need to be able to somehow incentivize the demand creation by orchestrating a physical supply chain of LNG as marine fuel. Obvious location for that infrastructure will be up in Pilbara, where it is the largest iron ore export terminal in the whole world. The key to all this is that the industry must collaborate to share the burden of creating a supply chain so that the game can begin. LMFI can facilitate this as an independent body. We believe that the common use of facility concept or the model probably is an effective approach where interested parties join hands to develop the startup infrastructure to supply LNG as maritime fuel. Again, industry collaboration, we think is a key to this. I truly wish that we work together to make this happen. Again, competition is mounting and the clock is ticking. With support from the government and community, I think AA is well positioned to outsmart other competition or competitors in this zone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Hiro. And Michael, Carnegie Clean Energy has been long recognised as a pioneer in wave energy, which can be seen as harvesting energy from the ocean rather than even below or in the ocean. So just wonder if you could just tell us where that technology is at and what opportunities you see in the Indo-Pacific region.
Sure. So Carnegie is a Perth-based company listed on the stock exchange, but focused on our region. We have been commercialising our wave power technology for a few years now that generates electricity from the ocean's swell. We also more recently have been doing solar and battery projects and combining those technologies together into what are called microgrids, which are combinations of different generation sources with some battery storage, often still some diesel generation as well, and then a control system and architecture that brings those together to match the demand of the customer. If we think just on the wave side, within our region, within our zone, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about a little bit like Hero was saying, the supply and the demand side. Certainly from a supply point of view, there's an abundance of ocean but in our zone, clearly, and a lot of swell in that ocean. If you also look at it from where the demand fits in with that supply, we have nearest neighbours, countries like Indonesia, say, with something like 15,000 islands, more than 1,000 inhabited, the Philippines with 5,000 islands with a couple of thousand inhabited. And I think the Foreign Minister this morning mentioned the stat just in Australia alone of 80% of the population living within 50 kilometres of the ocean. There is a vast opportunity to deliver power to these island nations and coastal communities from the oceans. So there's certainly a supply and a demand side there. The bit that's really missing in that equation in the wave energy space historically has been the bit that needs to sit between those two, which is the technology that unlocks the opportunity to deliver it to the customer. And so that's really where we've been focused on, is on commercialising that technology. Most power technologies are commercialised often by governments on government balance sheet, often in departments of defence. If you look at gas turbines or nuclear technology, even solar, largely commercialised through US and UK departments of defence for military reasons and then spun out into the private sector. So a private sector company trying to commercialise a power technology perhaps is a little crazy. But we've been making pretty good progress over the last 5 to 10 years. We're considered a leader in the space globally. And I think clearly for us there is an opportunity to look north in our zone, to look for both opportunities to deploy our wave technology, but also beyond that to manufacture as well. Because clearly, we already source a number of our componentry from the region, but to apply some scale to that, deliver cost-effective power from the waves is really the next big challenge for us. We've proven we can do this technically. We operated off HMAS Stirling, which I think the Premier mentioned this morning, off the West Australian coast here at Garden Island. We operated the only wave power project. That energy was supplied to the Department of Defence there. We also used that to power a desalination plant, and that's the other opportunity here, is to bring energy and water together, both tapping into the ocean's supply of seawater, but also using the energy to desalinate that to supply fresh water, because every island typically has an energy problem and a water problem as well. So what we're actually doing, and I'll finish on this point, right now at HMAS Stirling on Garden Island is where we've had wave operating, we've had desalination operating. We're now adding to that solar and batteries. So we're constructing a 2 megawatt solar project with a 2 megawatt lithium-ion battery that will demonstrate for the first time in the world this ecosystem of different power generation technologies with storage, with the backup diesel that's already on Garden Island. That will allow the base to take advantage of the cheap renewable energy from solar during the day. But should there be a security of supply issue, some breakdown in supply from the mainland, the base will be able to seamlessly ramp up onto its diesels with no interruption. So that ability to bumperlessly transfer on and off the grid is something that's directly applicable to all of those islands right through our region.
Thank you very much, Michael. And Professor Zhong, given the size of the Chinese economy and the demand for energy, much of the interrelationship between the energy and the oceans is probably very much focused on securing supply for China's energy needs. Can you help us understand this dynamic from a recipient country or a consumer's perspective?
Thank you, Chairwoman, and I want to give thanks to Professor Gordon Frick giving me this better opportunity to share insights from a Chinese perspective. I think the basic fact is China became the largest fuel consumer in the world since 2009, according to BP statistics. And I think China will not overtake in the short near term by any other countries. So it's very important, I think, to pay attention to China's behavior in international energy market. And I want to point to 3 points. The first point is we should pay attention to the basic structure of flow consumed in China. Something different from developing countries as well as developed countries. As a middle income level country, I think China's fuel consumption is much higher than the basic level. And in the near future, this basic structure will not change very dramatically. So for China, the challenge is how to improve its energy efficiency and energy security in broader scope. As I might remember, I think President Xi Jinping gave a very important speech 3 years ago. He argued that China needs a energy revolution. So I think he's very seriously take attention to this issue. So maybe I think we can learn from the developed countries how to improve the energy share in his economic transition from manufacturing-oriented, export-oriented country to a domestic consumer-dominated economy. So this, I think, is the kind of first point. The second point is, I think the energy relation China with neighboring countries is somewhat different from the economic relation with its neighboring countries. In terms of economic sense, the most important economic partner is located in Northeast Asia, I mean South Korea and Japan. But if you take energy as the first point, it's something very different. You know, China is a continental power. So since 2010, Turkmenistan became the country of pipeline natural gas in China's import system. And during past several years, I think China added Myanmar as a new source of China's natural gas. So I think China wants to balance the landed source and maritime source. So something is different from Australia or Malaysia, Indonesia. But basically, I think the importance of this maritime supply to China, I think decreased because Turkmenistan, Myanmar, and I think their importance grows. So it's somewhat from the maritime power when you see China's energy landscape. So this is the second point, is something different from. And the third point is the future of China. Because I said China will maintain this, the first largest one for many years. So how China maintain a balance between its import and supply, as well as the other countries concerned, whether China can maintain its import stable. Many, I think, international observers are afraid that China's economy will lack its dynamics and reduce the import of its energy. But I think in terms of growth rate, China still I think maintain very high speed rate, a little bit slowly than India. But I think in terms of its larger scale, China still needs more basic and stable supply from outside the world. So why I think Chinese government proposed the One Belt, One Road. One, I think, kind of purpose is to make safety of energy supply from land as well as maritime. So basic information I want to illustrate is China needs more international cooperation, not only national security, but international security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we really do have a sense there of how important energy is and how interconnected we all are. And you spoke, Hero, of competition. You spoke of opportunity, Michael, and you spoke really of diversifying supply. What are the opportunities for cooperation and collaboration that each of you might see or even be working on? Who'd like to start? Maybe Hero.
Sure. I think industry, obviously, in any industry, we compete with one another, and transparency must be warranted, and the rule of the game must be established in order for us to compete. So, in one sense, competition kind of promotes better service and better line of a supply chain. But before competition begins, industry must collaborate in order for us to be able to create a playground to be able to compete. Because otherwise, the competition will be taking place elsewhere, in other regions. So in order to bring the industry here in the region, industry must join hands together to collaborate so that everybody can play the game.
Thank you very much for that. Michael, a question just flashed up on the screen. Here we are, from Andrew at All Saints. Just asking, given the dominance of the majors throughout energy and the different markets, does it make economic sense for smaller companies to break into those massive markets?
I hope so. That's what I spend my time on. Look, I think the big, powerful incumbents, the BP, Shell, Gazprom's mentioned there. There's many others, and they do dominate the energy space in particular. What we do know is that we desperately need innovation, and we're seeing a lot of innovation in this space, and I think we'll see a lot more to come. It's typically not those large incumbents that are going to be the source of that innovation. And I think Naveen mentioned at the start that the source of innovation typically is the smaller players who have nothing to lose, who don't have the legacy architecture and assets and supply chain that they need to sort of dismantle in order to compete. Otherwise, they're cannibalising their own market. So I think it's not to say that there's not a role to play for the major incumbents in transitioning. There certainly is, and many of them are doing so. But the real breakthrough innovation is going to come from small innovative companies. And I think, from an Australian point of view, looking north, we do have some competitive advantages in the energy space beyond just the traditional fuel sources that we often think about in terms, particularly LNG. If you think about renewable technologies, because of the nature of our population base, many of us living off-grid or very distant from centralised generation, a lot of innovation has come out of Australia and Western Australia in particular in off-grid, microgrid technologies that are directly applicable throughout the whole of Asia. And you could have a very successful business, but you could also have major impact on quality of life of many, many people throughout the Asian zone by just simply giving them electricity.
Thank you. Professor Zhong, are there opportunities in China for new technology from smaller overseas companies?
Actually, I'm understanding that the bigger company dominate the supply, but small companies can bring new ideas to how to make the different countries connected well. For example, I think in Myanmar's case, to my knowledge, a Chinese company also invited company from South Korea and other countries to jointly produce the better outcome, because different companies, they have different advantages in when they combine with different resources. For example, I think to Chinese companies, they lacks, I think, international resource to illustrate its good awareness, so its public affairs. And other companies can help Chinese companies to learn from this kind of issues. Yeah.
Thank you. Naveen, energy security, reliability, affordability, all hot button issues in Australia at the moment. It's perhaps something that we're not seeing so much here in Western Australia, but how can we avoid some of the issues that we're seeing in the NEM at the moment?
Sure. I mean, all our research into this space shows us that the only reason we're avoiding some of those challenges at the NEM, this might be putting the cat among the pigeons, the only reason is we actually have significant overcapacity in our system. And so we won't get the blackouts and we won't get the reliability issues but for sure we'll get the affordability issues that go with having a lot of extra capacity. In addition, renewables are coming at the speed of knots. We as McKinsey have looked in the crystal ball every 5 years and said, okay, how quickly is solar and storage going to come? And every time we have been the most aggressive predictor of how quickly it'll come, and every time we've been wrong. Every time we've been slower than it's actually come. So we are going to get renewables coming at a very, very quick pace. And by our estimate, by 2020, 2021, solar and storage would be cheaper in an individual sense. But the issue is the common good, which is if it becomes cheaper for every individual to get solar and storage, what happens to the grid that connects all of us and who pays for that? So I think this is a very real question. I think we're going to avoid a lot of the blackout conversations that are happening over East, which is, for us, a window. It is really an opportunity. We have a new government in place that can actually think through some of these issues. I think it's a real opportunity. And you asked about collaboration and cooperation earlier. I actually think this is absolutely a moment for government, for the utilities, and for private parties to come together to say, what is the grid of the future? How do we transition to that grid in a very seamless way? Because internationally, we have seen this happen almost in every geography that's gone through this ahead of us. Transitions come at a cost. And it's very, very hard for elected governments to figure out what to do exactly by themselves. So this is absolutely that time to have that conversation. We have a window, we should use it.
What incentive, so for Hero, what incentive for small maritime businesses would there be to change to natural gas? That's from Seth. Thank you, Seth.
Well, it's not a question of large or small business enterprise. It's just, it is more to do with where the world is headed to. For cleaner climate, International Maritime Organization is a UN body, and as a member of the United Nations, all these countries needs to comply with the ruling. I think it is a case of, for the greater good spirit, and smaller businesses will probably need to join hands and grow bigger. And I think one of the approaches to be able to form a consortium, if you are a small business, that's been a very useful structure. In early days of LNG marketing and supply of sales and agreements, where smaller buyers join hands to be able to negotiate the terms with the bigger players. So I think joining hands would be a very interesting and a creative approach for smaller businesses.
Thank you. Just generally on that issue, how important is national energy policy and the actions of regulators in driving change in this area? You talk about the IMO looking for a reduction in the percentage of sulphur emissions from shipping fuel. How important is that going to be in actually seeing real change in this industry?
I think for industry and government to work together, there needs to be the crystal ball not so being crystal ball being crystallized. I think that's the better word, because any investment that requires that is to be made needs certainty of business in the long term. So I think the process needs to be bipartisan, and if the government and industry to align themselves to be able to share the common goal and set the pace and think long term, and the regime to be placed, so for certainty of business can be assured.
How important is that certainty for you, Michael?
A good energy policy. I think that's probably one area that Australia can't claim any expertise in. We've been, I think, we've dropped the ball a few times on energy policy in the last decade or so in Australia. And I think what we're seeing, though, is it's really interesting at the moment. I think there's something like $10 to $12 billion worth of investment committed in the energy space, in the electricity energy space in Australia in the last 18 months, and it's essentially all renewables. It's all large-scale solar, large-scale wind, really, and increasingly some storage as well. So what we're seeing is that the lack of a coherent energy policy is actually kind of hurting the incumbents more than the innovators in that space. So, and that's great for the renewable energy industry, except the problem is that some of those benefits don't get equally distributed around the system. And it's a little bit back to that point around, the grid is one example, but you're seeing huge uptake in rooftop solar at the moment. And that's then distorting the way that the infrastructure that was built decades ago was designed to be monetised. So, look, energy policy is essential, and it's essential for the industry, it's for consumers, it's essential for politicians. I mean, we've lost a few prime ministers because we haven't got energy policy right as well. So, as a small company, though, we just have to be realistic and not expect we're going to get coherent energy policy anytime soon and take advantage of the uncertainty.
Yeah. Professor Zhong, can you comment on the importance of energy policy from a China perspective?
Okay, I think the basic fact is China is one of the best, most quickest import of natural gas. I think maybe more than the increase rate maybe more than 50%. So China, I want to have a very stable import from the suppliers such as Australia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Qatar. So this country is a small business, I think has a good opportunity to enter into Chinese market. The second point is Chinese government to relax entry of FDI. They allow, I think, foreign companies to merge and acquire some Chinese companies. So that may be the new opportunity. And the second point is China wants to provide their money to neighboring countries to establish better infrastructure and improve their economic performance. Maybe this kind of country is a new resource for the investment opportunity for the small companies. Yeah.
Thank you. Naveen, should we be optimistic about the opportunities for collaboration, and is the ocean going to be more and more important to us in this area?
I think that without doubt, if I think of most of, there was a chart that I think Chris from Rio Tinto put up earlier showing us the export map. This economy is dead without the ocean, so that much is clear. But without coherent energy policy and a way for the parties to have this conversation, I don't think it's just for the state. I think it's for this country. We do need to have that. It's not about collaboration, just being on the same table and having that conversation, and being able to transition us to the new energy world that we're going to enter willy-nilly. I think that's important.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of everybody here, can I please thank our panel for their wonderful contributions. I should just take the opportunity for a little bit of promotion. The Chamber of Commerce and the Perth USAsia Centre and UWA have been working together to map Western Australia's energy. We've got everything from upstream oil and gas and LNG to wonderful startups and innovation. We've put it all on a map, and we're going to be releasing a paper on that subject on the 22nd of November. So energy is just so vital to us all, and we've seen today how interconnected the countries and industry throughout our zone are. So please join with me in thanking our wonderful panel.